Welcome to this video of 10th class history 3rd chapter, first phase of the Indian national movement. The history of Indian national movement can be divided into three phases. The early nationalist phase from 1885 to 1907, assertive phase from 1907 to 1916, the Gandhian era from 1915 to 1947. Here we are discussing the early nationalist phase. The history of Indian national movement is the history of Indian National Congress too. We know in 1885, December 28, A. F. Hume, a retired British officer, along with some Indian leaders, founded the Indian National Congress. And soon the people of India accepted the leadership of the Congress in launching the freedom struggle. In its initial years, the Congress was led by a group of leaders who were called the early nationalists or the moderates. They were called moderates because they believed in peaceful means of agitation like petition, memorandum, peaceful meetings and protests, etc. They were a group of educated professionals like lawyers, barristers, teachers and officials. They were from different parts of the country. For example, W.C. Banerjee, Raj Bihari Ghosh, Surendranath Banerjee and R. Siddharth from Bengal, Dadabhai Naoroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Firoz Shah Mehta and Justice Rande from Maharashtra and Gujarat, P. R. Naidu, Subramania Iyer and Anand Charlu from Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya from Uttar Pradesh. The early nationalist leaders who led the Congress and the national movement in initial years were staunch believers in open-minded and moderate politics. They believed in loyalty to the British Crown. They asked for constitutional and other reforms within the framework of British rule as they had faith in British sense of justice and fair play. They believed that since the Britishers were honest, they would fulfill the promises they have given to India soon after the first war of independence under the Crown's proclamation. They believed that the continuation of the British connection with India was in the interest of both England and India. They believed that if Britishers continue in rule in India, India is going to benefit a lot. They concerned themselves with the demand for reforms. Their demands were moderate in nature. What were the beliefs of the early nationalists about the Britishers? The early nationalists had faith in the sense of justice, fair play, honesty and integrity of the British. It was their hope that the British would grant home rule to Indians. They relied on the solemn pledges made by the British government. That means they believed that since the Britishers were honest and they had a higher sense of justice, they would fulfill all the promises the British Crown has given to the Britishers soon after the first war of independence. Third, they believed that the British rule had many benefits. For example, it aided in cleansing social ills like sati, untouchability and child marriage. They thought that British rule in India will help us to eradicate a lot of social evils from the Indian society. Fourth, they were of the opinion that the Britain would help Indians govern themselves according to Western standards. Fifth, they said that the main obstacle in Indian progress was social and economic backwardness of Indians and not the British colonial rule. They did not find anything wrong in the British rule in India. Instead, they believed that the backwardness of India was due to the social and economic backwardness of Indian society. The major causes for the backwardness of India is not the British rule. Instead, the social evils like a caste system, child marriage and all the exploitation of women and etc. etc. They relied on constitutional and peaceful methods to achieve their aims. They believed in patience and reconciliation rather than in violence and confrontation. They believed in the peaceful methods to attain more freedom under the British. They did not believe in violence and protest. Now let us see the demands of the early nationalists. What all demands they put in front of the British? The demands can be categorized into four. First, constitutional reforms. Second, economic reforms. Third, administrative demands. And fourth, defense of civil. Now, let's see what all demands they put forward under the constitutional reforms. The early nationalists wanted a large share in the government of their country. They believed that eventually India should move towards democratic self-government. However, they did not ask for immediate achievement of their goals as they feared that the government would suppress their activities. They therefore aimed at winning freedom through a gradual process. We had seen how the Britishers responded to the first war of independence. They brutally suppressed the demand for freedom. So, these early nationalists to believe that if they put high demands in front of the Britishers, they are going to put it down brutally. So they thought that they could achieve freedom through gradual process. Now let us see their demands. First, abolition of Indian Council. We know that soon after the first war of independence, an Indian Council was set up in England to look after the matters of India. And all the expenses of this Indian Council was borne by the money from India. So early nationalists demanded the abolition of Indian Council. Second, the expansion of the Legislative Council and Legislative Assemblies. That means more seats should be allotted for the Indians, both in the center and in provinces. Third, increase in the membership of Indians by including some members elected by local bodies like chambers of commerce, universities, etc. in these councils, and by giving greater powers to them. They demanded Indian control over the public purse and raised the slogan "No taxation without representation." They demanded that the money collected from India should be controlled by Indians. Fourth, by beginning of the 20th century, they made a demand for Swarajya or self-government within the British Empire, like the self-governing colonies of Canada and Australia. Fifth, adequate representation of Indians in the Executive Council of the Viceroy and those of the governors. Now, under the economic reforms, the early nationalists put the following demands. First, reduction in land revenue and protection of peasants against unjust demands of the zamindars. Zamindars were collecting land revenue for the Britishers. And the early nationalists demanded that the peasants of India should be protected from the unjust demands of the zamindars, and the land revenue has to be reduced. Second demand, reduction in expenditure on the army and the money thus saved to be spent on welfare activities such as health and education. Now, British government was spending a lot of money on the army for their colonial purposes, expansions. So early nationalists demanded that the unwanted expense on the army has to be reduced and the money thus saved should be spent for the welfare of Indians. Third, an inquiry into India's growing poverty and famines. They put forward a demand that an inquiry has to be done to see why poverty is increasing in India and why frequent famines occurs. Fourth, availability of cheap credit to peasants through agricultural banks. Fifth, development of banking, irrigation, medical and health facilities for the people. Sixth, industrial growth through trade protection. That is, a heavy tax should be imposed on imported goods and the government should give loans for the development of iron, coal, paper and sugar industries in India. 7. Total abolition of salt tax and the duty on sugar. Now, in the administrative phase, they put the following demands. First, Demand for Indianization of services through simultaneous Indian civil service examinations in England and India. They demanded that the Indian civil service examination has to be conducted both in India and England so that more Indians can participate in this service exam and more Indians will come into the service. So, Indianization of this service will be possible. Second, complete separation of the executive and the judiciary. They made this demand to protect Indians from the arbitrary acts of the police and bureaucracy. Under the British, the executive and judiciary were safe. So the officers who arrest, they had the judicial powers. So Indians had to face a lot of injustice. So here they put forward a demand that executive and judiciary has to be separated. Third, increase in the powers of the local bodies and a reduction of official control over them. Fourth, repeal of Anzac and License Act. We know that under this act, Indians were prohibited from keeping arms illegally without license. They could be arrested. So they want to remove this Arms Act and the License Act. Fifth, wider employment of Indians in the higher grades of administrative services. Here in India, Indians are appointed in the lower grade. All the high grades of jobs were reserved for the Britishers. And the chances of promotion was very less. So here they demanded that Indians also should be considered for the higher grades of administrative jobs under the British. They wanted more primary schools to spread education among the masses. Seventh, they wanted improvement of the police system to make it honest, efficient and popular. Now this police was very cruel and they were very corrupt. So they wanted to improve the nature of the police to make them more honest, efficient and popular. Under the defense of civil rights, they put the following demands. The early nationalists defended civil rights whenever the British government tried to curtail them. In fact, it was because of the political work done by the early nationalists that democratic ideas began to take root among Indians. The early nationalists demanded the following civil rights. Removal of the restrictions imposed by the British government on the freedom of speech and the freedom of press. Under the British, no right was there to criticize the government or publish any matter that criticized the policies of the British. So they wanted more freedom of speech and the freedom of the press. Second, abolition of the Preventive Detention Act and restoration of individual liberties. The Britishers had made such laws to arrest any Indians under the pretext of a preventive detention. So they wanted to remove this. Restoration of right to assemble and to form associations. The early nationalists were practical. They wanted to win freedom by a gradual process. They did not aim at high demands because they wanted to work on the lines of least resistance. Besides, they did not want to arouse serious opposition. They knew that if they demand a complete freedom, they are going to be suppressed and all their activities are going to be stopped. So they wanted to attain freedom through a gradual process. I hope you understood the things explained in this video. Thank you.